The stagecoach lurched to a stop, throwing Clara Hensley forward in her seat. Through the dust-covered window, she could see the muddy streets of dust water stretching before her like a promise already broken. The recent storm had turned the main thoroughfare into a river of brown sludge, and the gray sky above threatened more rain. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down, his voice rough as the leather reins in his hands. Clara gathered her traveling dress, the navy wool already spattered with mud from the journey, and carefully descended the wooden steps. Her boots squelched into the mire, and she felt the cold wetness seep through the worn leather. She clutched her carpetbag tighter, the weight of it familiar in her palm, everything she owned in the world, packed into one modest case. The town looked smaller than she'd imagined. Marshal King's letters had painted Dustwater as a thriving settlement, full of opportunity and decent folk. But the ramshackle buildings lining the street told a different story. Paint peeled from storefronts, and more than one window was boarded over. A mangy dog skulked between the buildings, tail tucked low. Clara straightened her spine, ignoring the curious stares from the townsfolk sheltering under awnings and porches. She was used to being looked at 5 feet 9 inches. She towered over most women and stood eye to eye with many men. Her broad shoulders and strong hands marked her as someone who'd known work, real work, not the delicate needlework expected of Eastern ladies. She'd written Marshall about her appearance, worried he might expect someone more delicate. "I am built for honest labor," she'd penned carefully, "and seek a partner who values strength of character over fashionable frailty." His response had been reassuring. "A ranch wife needs backbone more than beauty. You sound like just what I'm looking for." But Marshall wasn't here. Clara scanned the street again, searching for a man matching his description: medium height, dark hair, a face that inspires trust, as his mother had written in her postscript. The only souls brave enough to venture into the mud were a pair of cowboys leading horses to the livery stable and an old woman hurrying toward the general store. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. Clara pressed herself against the wall of the stage office, trying to shield herself and her bag from the weather. The clerk inside barely glanced up from his ledger when she peered through the window. "Excuse me," she called through the glass. "I'm looking for the King residence, Marshal King." The clerk's expression shifted from boredom to something like pity. "King Place is 3 streets over. Big white house with green shutters. Can't miss it." He paused, seeming to debate whether to say more. "You the mail-order bride?" Heat flooded Clara's cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm Miss Clara Hensley. Mr. King and I have been corresponding." "Uh-huh." The clerk returned to his ledger, but not before Clara caught the skeptical twist of his mouth. The rain was falling harder now, turning the street into a treacherous river. Clara pulled her shawl over her head and plunged into the storm. Her skirts grew heavy with mud and water, dragging at her legs with each step. By the time she reached the white house with green shutters, she was soaked through, her carefully pinned hair plastered to her skull. The King house stood apart from its neighbors, 2 stories of pristine paint and neat garden beds. Even in the rain, it spoke of prosperity and respectability. Clara climbed the porch steps, conscious of the muddy tracks she left behind, and knocked firmly on the door. It opened almost immediately, revealing a severe woman in black bombazine, Mrs. King. No doubt she had Marshall's dark hair, though hers was streaked with silver and pulled into a punishing bun. "Yes." The woman's gaze traveled from Clara's dripping hair to her mud-caked boots, her mouth tightening with each inch. Mrs. King, I'm Clara Hensley. I've come to—" "I know who you are." Mrs. King's voice could have curdled milk. "Marshall—" A man appeared behind his mother, and Clara's heart sank. This was Marshal King, shorter than she'd imagined, with weak eyes that wouldn't quite meet hers. He looked like a boy caught stealing cookies, not a man ready to take a wife. Miss Hensley, he mumbled. You're taller than I expected. Marshal, go back inside. Mrs. King commanded. To Clara's dismay, he obeyed without protest, disappearing into the house's dim interior. Mrs. King stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. I'll be plain, Miss Hensley. You're not what we expected, not what Marshall needs. Clara found her voice. I've traveled over 1,000 miles. Mrs. King, Marshall and I have an understanding. Marshall has many understandings, most of them foolish. The older woman's eyes were hard as flint. Look at yourself. You're built like a field hand, not a proper wife. What would people say Marshall has a position to maintain in this town? I can work, Clara said, hating the pleading note that crept into her voice. I'm strong, capable. Exactly what we don't need. Marshall requires a wife who'll enhance his standing, not embarrass him at social gatherings. Mrs. King's smile was sharp as a blade. I'll reimburse your travel expenses. Of course, the eastbound stage leaves Thursday. Thunder cracked overhead, so loud Clara felt it in her chest. She stood there, rain streaming down her face, mingling with what might have been tears if she'd been the crying sort. Through the parlor window, she could see Marshall watching, his face a pale oval behind the lace curtains. Keep your money, Clara said quietly, and your son. She turned and walked back into the storm, her bag weighing heavier with each step. The rain had turned vicious, driving sideways, turning the simple act of walking into a battle. She had no idea where to go, no plan beyond putting distance between herself and that house of broken promises. That's when she saw him, a man on horseback, cutting through the storm like it was nothing more than a spring shower. He sat tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and sure, guiding his mount with the unconscious ease of someone born to it. As he drew closer, Clara could make out weathered features under a wide-brimmed hat, eyes the color of winter sky. He pulled up beside her, swinging down from the saddle in one fluid motion. Ma'am, you shouldn't be out in this weather. Clara wanted to laugh, or scream, maybe both. I don't appear to have many choices at the moment. The man's gaze took in her soaked dress, her muddy boots, the bag clutched in her white-knuckled grip. Whatever he saw there made his expression soften. Wyatt Cade, he said, touching the brim of his hat. I've got a ranch about 3 miles out. You're welcome to shelter there till this blows over. Clara knew she should refuse. Accepting hospitality from a strange man went against every rule of propriety she'd been taught. But propriety hadn't kept Marshall King's promises. Propriety wouldn't keep her warm and dry. Clara Hensley, she said, and I'd be grateful. Without asking permission, Wyatt took her bag and secured it to his saddle. Then he helped her mount, his hands steady and impersonal at her waist. He swung up behind her, reaching around to take the reins, and Clara was suddenly aware of solid warmth at her back, the first comfort she'd felt all day. They rode through the storm in silence, and Clara let herself lean back, just a little, against this stranger who asked no questions and offered no judgments. The thunder shook the very air around them, but for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, Clara felt something that might have been hope. The ride to Wyatt's ranch passed in a blur of rain and wind. Clara kept her eyes fixed on the horse's mane, trying not to think about how her life had unraveled in the space of an hour. The solid presence behind her was both comfort and torment, a reminder that strangers could show more kindness than those who'd promised to cherish her. When they finally stopped, Clara could barely make out the shape of a modest cabin through the downpour. It sat low and sturdy against the landscape, built to withstand whatever nature threw at it. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth within. Wyatt dismounted first, then helped her down. Clara's legs nearly buckled from cold, from exhaustion, from the weight of her waterlogged skirts. He steadied her with a hand at her elbow, then quickly released her. Let's get you inside, he said, grabbing her bag from the saddle. I'll see to the horse after. The cabin's interior was simple but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames crackling cheerfully behind an iron grate, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, shelves lined with supplies, everything necessary, nothing frivolous. It spoke of a man who valued function over form. Clara stood dripping on the threshold, suddenly aware of what she must look like. Her dress clung to her frame, heavy with mud and rain. Her hair hung in sodden ropes around her face. She was making a puddle on his clean floor. "There's a blanket in that chest," Wyatt said, nodding toward a wooden box near the bed. "Get yourself warm. I'll put coffee on once I've stabled Cherokee." He disappeared back into the storm before Clara could thank him. She stood there a moment longer, listening to the rain hammer the roof, then moved toward the chest. The blanket was wool, rough but clean, smelling faintly of cedar. She wrapped it around her shoulders, then sank into one of the chairs near the fire. The heat was almost painful against her cold skin. Clara held her hands toward the flames, watching steam rise from her sleeves. Her thoughts kept circling back to Marshall's face in the window, to his mother's cutting words, "Built like a field hand." Well, perhaps she was, but she'd thought foolishly that might be an asset in ranch country. The door opened again, bringing a gust of cold air and Wyatt Cade. He hung his hat on a peg, shook water from his coat, then moved to the stove with practiced efficiency. Soon, the smell of coffee filled the small space. "Sugar?" he asked, pulling down 2 tin cups. "No, thank you." He handed her the coffee, then took the other chair. For a moment, they sat in silence, the storm raging outside while the fire popped and hissed between them. Clara wrapped her hands around the hot cup, grateful for something to hold. "You don't have to tell me," Wyatt said finally, "but sometimes it helps." Clara took a sip of coffee. It was strong, slightly bitter, perfect. "I came here to marry Marshall King." If Wyatt was surprised, he didn't show it. His expression remained neutral, weathered face giving nothing away. His letters painted a different picture. Clara continued, "Of himself, of what he wanted. I should have known when he kept mentioning his mother's approval." She laughed, short and sharp. "She took one look at me and decided I wasn't suitable. Too tall, too strong, too much." "And Marshall?" Stood behind her skirts like a boy. The words tasted bitter as the coffee. "I traveled over 1,000 miles for a man who couldn't even speak up for me." Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. Then, his loss. The simple words hit Clara harder than any flowery sympathy might have. She blinked rapidly, determined not to cry in front of this stranger who'd shown her more consideration in an hour than her intended husband had managed at all. "What will you do now?" Wyatt asked. It was the question Clara had been avoiding. "I don't know. I used most of my savings for the journey. Mrs. King offered to pay my way back east, but—" She shook her head. "There's nothing there for me either. That's why I answered Marshall's advertisement in the first place." Another silence fell. The rain had softened from a roar to a steady patter. Clara became aware of how inappropriate this situation was alone with a strange man. Soaked to the skin, with nowhere else to go, but propriety seemed a luxury she could no longer afford. "You could stay in Dustwater," Wyatt said slowly. "Town's always needing teachers, seamstresses, decent work for a woman." Under the noses of the Kings, being whispered about as the bride who wasn't good enough, Clara's hands tightened on the cup. "I'd rather not give them the satisfaction." Wyatt stood abruptly, moving to stoke the fire. With his back to her, he said, "I could use help here. My last cook quit 2 weeks ago, said the isolation was driving him mad. The hands are getting mighty tired of my attempts at biscuits." Clara studied his broad back, the way he held himself carefully still. "You're offering me work. Room, board, fair wages, hard work, nothing fancy, but honest." He turned to face her. "You could stay until you figure out your next step." No obligations beyond that. It was more than she had any right to expect. Still, Clara had learned to be wary of men's offers. What would people say, a woman living out here with you? I've got a separate bunkhouse where the hands stay during roundup. You could have that. As for what people say, he shrugged. I've found folks will talk regardless. Might as well give them something interesting. Despite everything, Clara felt her lips twitch toward a smile. You don't know anything about me. I could be a terrible cook. Are you? No. She lifted her chin. I ran a boarding house kitchen in Ohio for 3 years. 15 mouths to feed. 3 meals a day. Then you're already overqualified. Wyatt returned to his chair. The offer stands. Think on it. Clara did think, staring into the fire while the coffee cooled in her hands. She thought about pride and propriety, about the narrow path prescribed for women like her. She thought about Marshall's weak eyes and his mother's cruel smile. She thought about starting over, again, with nothing but her own 2 hands and whatever courage she could muster. I'll need to see the bunkhouse first, she said, and we should discuss wages. I won't work for free, no matter how desperate I might seem. Something that might have been approval flickered in Wyatt's eyes. Fair enough. Sun should break through soon. This kind of storm never lasts long. We can ride out to look at the bunkhouse then. They spent the remaining hour in companionable silence. Clara's dress began to dry, though it would need a proper washing to remove the mud stains. Her hair was a lost cause without her brushes and pins, still packed in her bag. But the coffee was hot, the fire was warm, and she was no longer standing in the rain like a discarded package. When the storm finally passed, weak sunlight filtering through the windows, Wyatt stood and offered his hand. Ready to see your potential new home, Miss Hensley. Clara looked at his outstretched hand, calloused, steady, honest. Nothing like Marshall's soft fingers that had penned such lovely lies. She placed her hand in his and let him pull her to her feet. Ready as I'll ever be, Mr. Cade. The bunkhouse stood 50 yards from the main cabin, small but solidly built. Inside, it was sparse a bed, a washstand, a small stove for heat, but the roof was sound, the floor was clean, and the door had a sturdy lock. It's not much, Wyatt said, almost apologetically. Clara ran her hand over the windowsill, tested the bed's firmness, checked the stove's chimney for blockages. It's private and dry. That's more than I had an hour ago. They negotiated wages standing in the doorway, Clara holding firm on what she considered fair, Wyatt offering a bit more than she asked. Finally, they shook hands on the deal. I'll start tomorrow, Clara said. Give me today to settle in and wash the road off me. I'll bring your bag over. And Miss Hensley. Wyatt paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think Marshall King is a fool. Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone in her new home. She sat on the narrow bed, testing its springs, and allowed herself one moment of pure relief. It wasn't what she'd planned. It wasn't what she'd dreamed during those long nights in Ohio, reading Marshall's letters by candlelight. But it was hers, earned by her own negotiation, her own worth, and for now, that was enough. Thunder rumbled distantly, the storm moving on to trouble other souls. Clara stood, squared her shoulders, and began making the space her own. Clara woke before dawn, the habit of years refusing to break. The bunkhouse was cold, frost etching patterns on the single window, but she'd slept in colder places. She dressed quickly in her simplest work dress, a brown calico that had seen better days but would serve for ranch work, and pinned her hair into a practical bun. The walk to the main house was short but bitter, her breath forming clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. Stars still glittered overhead, though the eastern horizon showed the faintest blush of light. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed. She found Wyatt already awake, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, studying what looked like account books by lamplight. He glanced up when she entered. and something flickered across his face, surprise. Perhaps that she was really there. "Morning," he said simply. "Morning." Clara moved to the stove, assessing the kitchen supplies with a practiced eye. "How many hands need feeding?" "Just 3 right now, plus you and me. Come round-up time. That'll triple." Clara nodded. Already planning. She found flour, lard, salt, the basics for biscuits. A basket of eggs sat on the counter, and she spotted bacon in the cold box. Simple fare, but she could work with it. "Coffee's hot if you want some," Wyatt offered. "After I get the biscuits started." Clara tied on the apron she found hanging by the stove. It was far too big made for a man, but she cinched it tight and set to work. She fell into the rhythm easily, hands moving without thought. "Cut the lard into the flour, add the buttermilk, barely mix." The familiar motion soothed something raw in her chest. This, at least, she knew how to do. By the time the ranch hands stumbled in, drawn by the smell of breakfast, Clara had produced a meal that made them stop short in the doorway. Fluffy biscuits, crisp bacon, eggs cooked just right. After 2 weeks of Wyatt's attempts at cooking, it must have seemed like a miracle. "Boys, this is Miss Hensley," Wyatt said. "She'll be handling the cooking from now on." The 3 men, Tom, a grizzled older man with kind eyes, Jake, young and eager, and Samuel, quiet and watchful, tipped their hats politely. They fell on the food like starving wolves, and Clara felt a familiar satisfaction at the sight of empty plates being pushed back. "Ma'am," Tom said, wiping his mouth, "that was the finest meal I've had since my wife passed. Welcome to the Double C." The others murmured agreement, and Clara felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. She'd passed the first test. The days fell into a pattern. Up before dawn, breakfast for the hands, then cleaning and preparing for the noon meal. Afternoons were for mending, washing, tending the kitchen garden that had gone wild without care. Supper, then back to the bunkhouse as darkness fell. It was hard work, but no harder than what she'd known in Ohio, and there was something clean about it, something honest. No pretense, no trying to be something she wasn't. Just work and wages, fairly earned. Wyatt kept a respectful distance, appearing for meals but otherwise leaving her to establish her own routine. But Clara noticed things: how he always checked that she had enough firewood, how new supplies appeared in the kitchen just before she needed them, how he'd fixed the sticky window in the bunkhouse without being asked. It was the end of her first week when she noticed Wyatt favoring his left hand at supper. He'd wrapped a none-too-clean bandana around it, blood seeping through the fabric. "Let me see that," Clara said, not quite making it a request. "It's nothing. Caught it on some barbed wire." "And when was the last time that wire was cleaned?" Clara fixed him with the look that had cowed rowdy boarders back in Ohio. "Infection's nothing to trifle with. Mr. Cade." He submitted to her ministrations with surprising meekness. The cut was deep, but clean. Thankfully. Clara heated water, added carbolic, and cleaned the wound thoroughly despite his wincing. "You've done this before," he observed as she wrapped his hand with strips of clean cotton. "Boarding house. Remember, someone was always needing patching up." She tied off the bandage neatly. "Keep it clean and dry. I'll check it again tomorrow." "Yes, ma'am." There was a hint of amusement in his voice, but also something else. Warmth. Maybe appreciation. The moment stretched between them. Clara suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, of the warmth of his hand in hers. She released him quickly, busying herself with clearing the medical supplies. "Thank you," he said quietly. "It's nothing you wouldn't do for anyone," Clara replied, not quite meeting his eyes. "That's not entirely true." But before she could ask what he meant, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. The second week brought a trial Clara hadn't expected. She'd taken the wagon to town for supplies, a list clutched in her hand and instructions from Wyatt on which merchants to patronize. She'd been prepared for stares, for whispers. She hadn't been prepared for Edith King. Marshall's mother stood in the general store like a queen holding court, surrounded by the town's prominent ladies. Her eyes found Clara immediately, narrowing with malicious delight. "Why, Miss Hensley," she said, voice carrying clearly through the store. "How unexpected to see you still in town. I'd assumed you'd taken my advice about the eastbound stage." Clara kept her voice level. "I found employment, Mrs. King. I'm working at the Double C Ranch." A titter ran through the assembled ladies. "Mrs." King's smile sharpened. "Working? Yes, I suppose that's one word for it. Living alone with Wyatt Cade. No chaperone, no propriety. Well, I suppose it's fitting. Marshall always did say you seemed more suited to manual labor than matrimony." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks, but she forced herself to meet the woman's gaze steadily. "Honest work has no shame in it, Mrs. King, and Mr. Cade has been nothing but respectful and professional." "Professional." Mrs. King tasted the word like spoiled milk. "How modern. Tell me, does he pay you by the week or by the—" "That's enough, Edith." The voice came from behind Clara. Martha Kellum, the widow she'd seen at church the previous Sunday, stepped forward. She was a handsome woman in her 40s, with steel-gray hair and eyes to match. "Martha, Mrs." King said coolly, "I didn't realize you were acquainted with Miss Hensley. I make it my business to welcome all newcomers to Dustwater." Martha's tone was pleasant, but there was iron beneath. "Miss Hensley, I believe you were looking for preserving jars. I have some extras I'd be happy to share. Why don't you come with me?" It was a dismissal and a rescue rolled into one. Clara murmured her thanks and followed Martha from the store, aware of the whispers rising behind them like a flock of disturbed birds. Outside, Martha turned to face her. "Edith King is a bitter woman who raised a weak son. Don't let her poison get under your skin." "I appreciate your kindness, Mrs. Kellum." "Martha, please." The widow studied her with shrewd eyes. "You're not what I expected when I heard Wyatt had taken on a female cook." Clara stiffened. "I'm a hard worker, Mrs. Martha, nothing more." "I'm sure you are." Martha's smile was knowing. "Wyatt Cade is a good man, better than most, but he's also been alone a long time. Just be careful, both of you." She left Clara standing on the boardwalk, wondering what warning lay beneath the words. But there was shopping to finish and a ranch to return to. So Clara pushed the encounter aside and focused on the task at hand. She was loading the wagon when Marshall King appeared. He approached hesitantly, glancing around as if afraid of being seen. "Clara, Miss Hensley, might I speak with you?" Clara continued loading, not trusting herself to look at him. "Speak freely, Mr. King." "I wanted to apologize for what happened. Mother was, that is, I should have—" "Should have what?" Now Clara did turn, fixing him with a direct stare that made him step back. "Stood up for me, honored your word, behaved like a man instead of a boy." Marshall flushed. "It's not that simple. Mother has certain expectations." "And you'll meet them, no doubt, everyone." Clara turned back to the wagon. "We have nothing more to discuss. Mr. King, you made your choice. I've made mine. Working for Cade, living like an honest woman earning honest wages." Clara climbed onto the wagon seat. "Which is more than you offered me. Good day, Mr. King." She drove away without looking back, but her hands trembled on the reins, not from hurt that had already faded to a dull ache, from anger, clean and bright. How had she ever thought that weak-chinned boy could be a partner? When she reached the ranch, Wyatt was waiting to help unload. He took one look at her face and asked, "Rough trip to town?" "Educational," Clara said tightly. He didn't press, just helped her carry in the supplies. But that evening, she found a small package on her doorstep, tea, the good kind, wrapped in brown paper with no note. Clara brewed a cup and sat on her narrow porch, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. The ranch stretched out before her, peaceful in the evening light. Not what she'd planned, not what she'd dreamed, but real and solid, and hers for the earning. She raised her cup in a silent toast to unexpected futures and the courage to grasp them, then went inside to plan tomorrow's meals. The morning Clara decided to fix the old barn started like any other. She'd been at the Double C for 3 weeks now, and the routine had become comfortable as worn leather. But after breakfast, instead of heading back to the house, she stood studying the dilapidated structure that sat 50 yards from the main barn. "Something on your mind?" Wyatt asked, coming up beside her with his coffee. "That barn's a waste of good space." Clara said, "Roof's still sound. Walls are solid, just need some work." Wyatt followed her gaze. "Been meaning to get to it, never seem to find the time." "I have time." Clara turned to face him. "After the noon meal's cleaned up. Afternoons are quiet. I could work on it then." He studied her, that careful way he had of looking without staring. "You know carpentry?" "I know enough. Ran that boarding house. Remember, something always needed fixing, and hiring help cost money we didn't have." She lifted her chin. "Unless you object to me using the tools. Tools are meant to be used." He took a sip of coffee. "Just be careful. That wood's old. Might have weak spots." Clara nodded, already planning. She'd start with clearing out the debris, then assess what needed repair. The thought of having a project, something to build with her own hands, sent an unexpected thrill through her. That afternoon, she changed into her oldest dress and attacked the barn with determination. Years of neglect had left it full of broken equipment, rotted hay, and enough spider webs to outfit a haunted house. But beneath the mess, the bones were good. Tom found her there an hour later, wrestling with a broken plow that someone had abandoned in the corner. "Let me help with that. Miss Clara," he said, taking the other end. Together they halted outside. "Seems a shame to let this place go to ruin," Clara said, wiping sweat from her brow. "Mr. Wyatt's had a lot on his mind last few years." Tom replied carefully. "Ranch takes most of his time, what with running it near single-handed. No family to help." Tom's face closed up. Not anymore. Clara knew better than to push. She'd learned that ranch folk kept their secrets close, doling out personal information like water in a drought. But she filed the comment away. Another piece of the puzzle that was Wyatt Cade. By the end of the week, she'd cleared the barn and started on repairs. The work was satisfying in a way she hadn't expected. Each board she replaced, each nail she drove, was progress she could see and touch. Her hands grew rougher. Splinters became daily hazards, but she didn't mind. Jake and Samuel started helping when they could, drawn by curiosity and Clara's easy acceptance of their presence. Even Wyatt began stopping by in the evenings, offering advice or just watching her work. "You're handy with a hammer," he said one evening, as Clara finished replacing a section of siding. "My father was a carpenter, before the consumption took him." She tested the board's stability, satisfied when it held firm. He always said idle hands were the devil's playground. Guess some lessons stick. Smart man. Clara glanced at him. "What about your father?" Wyatt's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. "Died when I was 15. Ranch has been mine since then." 20 years, Clara calculated. 20 years of running this place alone. That's a heavy load for a boy. "I managed." His tone didn't invite sympathy. "You about done for the day? Sun's getting low." Clara recognized the deflection, but accepted it. "Just let me put these tools away." They walked back toward the main buildings together, the evening light casting long shadows across the yard. It had become a routine of sorts, this end-of-day check-in, and Clara found herself looking forward to it more than she should. "I've been thinking," Wyatt said suddenly. "Once you get that barn fixed up, might be good to use it for storage." Free up some space in the main barn. That's what I was planning. Clara agreed. Maybe even section off part of it for a proper root cellar. The one by the house is too small. You've thought this through. I like to be useful. She paused. I'm not good at being idle. Mr. Cade. Never have been. Wyatt, he said. We've been working side by side for near a month. Might as well use my given name. Wyatt, then. The name felt strange on her tongue. Too intimate. And you should call me Clara. Clara. He said it carefully, like he was trying it out. Suits you better than Miss Hensley, anyway. They'd reached the bunkhouse. Clara hesitated at her door, aware of him standing close in the gathering dusk. Too close, perhaps, for what they were to each other, employer and employee, nothing more. Good night, Wyatt. Night. Clara, don't work too hard on that barn. Rome wasn't built in a day. No, she agreed, but I bet they didn't have me helping. His laugh followed her inside, warm and rich. Clara leaned against the closed door, pressing a hand to her chest where her heart beat too fast. This was dangerous territory. She'd come here for survival, not for whatever this was becoming. But when she looked out her window later, she saw the light still burning in the main house. Wyatt's silhouette bent over his ledgers. A lonely sight. She understood loneliness, had made friends with it over the years, but somehow, seeing it in him made her chest ache. The next morning brought news from town. Tom had gone for supplies and returned with more than flour and coffee. Mrs. King's been flapping her gums, he reported at the noon meal, saying all kinds of things about the arrangements here. Clara's hand tightened on her fork, but she kept her voice steady. Let her talk. Truth speaks louder than gossip. That's just it, Tom said uncomfortably. She's stirring up the proper ladies in town, talking about moral standards and such, making noise about getting the sheriff involved. On what grounds? Wyatt's voice was dangerously quiet. Corrupting influences, improper living situations. Tom looked miserable. You know how she is when she gets her teeth into something. Clara set down her fork carefully. Then I should leave. I won't bring trouble to... You'll do no such thing. Wyatt's fist hit the table, making the dishes jump. Edith King doesn't run this ranch or this county, whatever she might think. But if she makes enough noise, then we'll deal with it. He looked around the table. Anyone here seen anything improper, any corrupting going on? Jake shook his head vigorously. Samuel muttered, No, sir. Tom just smiled. There you have it, Wyatt said. Let her talk. Wins all she's got. But Clara saw the worry in his eyes, the set of his jaw. She knew what damage whispers could do, how they could grow and spread like wildfire. And she knew Wyatt had more to lose than she did his reputation, his ranch, his standing in the community. That evening, she found him by the corral, watching the horses in the fading light. You're worried, she said. It wasn't a question. Edith King's got influence. Her husband left her money, and money talks loud in a small town. Then I should go, before this gets worse. He turned to her then, and something in his expression made her breath catch. You want to leave? No, Clara admitted. But I won't be the reason you lose everything you've worked for. I've been alone on this ranch for 5 years, Wyatt said quietly. 5 years of empty evenings and silent meals, of watching the seasons change with no one to share them with. You think I care what Edith King says when I finally have... He stopped, jaw tightening. Have what? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. Nothing. Never mind. He turned back to the horses. You're not leaving unless you want to. That's final. Clara stood there a moment longer, watching his rigid back, the way his hands gripped the fence rail. She wanted to touch him, to ease the tension in his shoulders. Wanted it so badly her hands shook with the effort of staying still. Instead, she said, the barn will be ready for use by week's end. I thought we could have a sort of celebration, Nothing fancy, just a good meal and maybe some of that whiskey Tom thinks he's hiding in the tack room. Wyatt's shoulders relaxed slightly. You know about that. I know everything that happens on this ranch. She allowed herself a small smile. It's my job to know. Is that all it is, a job? The question hung between them like morning mist. Clara knew she should say yes, should keep things simple and clear, but the word wouldn't come. No, she said finally. It's more than that. It's home. Wyatt turned then, and the look on his face made her glad for the distance between them, because if he'd been closer, she might have done something foolish, something that would prove Edith King right about everything. Home, he repeated. Yeah, that's what it is. They stood there as darkness fell. Two people caught between what was proper and what was real. Finally, Clara forced herself to step back. Good night, Wyatt. Clara! Her name was all he said, but it sounded like a prayer. She walked to her bunkhouse on unsteady legs, aware of his eyes following her. Inside. She pressed her palms against her heated cheeks and tried to calm her racing heart. This was more than dangerous now. This was inevitable. The question was what they would do when that moment came. The barn was finished. Clara stood in the doorway, surveying her work with satisfaction. Fresh boards replaced the rotted ones. The roof was patched and solid, and she'd even managed to whitewash the interior walls. It smelled of new wood and possibility. Never seen anything like it, Tom said from behind her. Month ago, this was near falling down. Now look at it. Just needed some attention, Clara said, but she couldn't hide her pride. Her hands bore the evidence of her labor calluses, healing cuts, a thumbnail that might never grow back straight. Battle scars, she thought, and worth every one. The celebration she'd planned was simple venison stew, fresh bread, apple pie made from the last of the winter stores. But she'd set up a table in the newly cleaned barn, hung lanterns from the rafters, and even convinced Jake to bring his fiddle. As the sun set, the ranch hands gathered, cleaned up and eager. Clara had seen them sneaking glances at the barn all day, curiosity evident in their faces. Now they walked in with something approaching reverence. Well, I'll be damned, Samuel said, then quickly added, Pardon, Miss Clara. You're pardoned, she said, smiling. Sit, everyone. Food's getting cold. They arranged themselves around the makeshift table planks set on sawhorses, but covered with a clean cloth. Clara had even found some wildflowers for a centerpiece, their purple blooms adding a touch of color to the rustic setting. Wyatt arrived last, having changed into a clean shirt. His hair was damp, like he'd dunked his head in the water trough, and Clara caught herself staring at the way it curled slightly at his collar. This is something, he said quietly, taking in the transformed space. His eyes found hers. You did all this. I had help. Clara deflected, but his approval warmed her more than the praise of all the others combined. The meal was lively. Tom told stories of his younger days, driving cattle up the Chisholm Trail. Jake played his fiddle between courses, simple tunes that had Samuel tapping his foot. Even Wyatt relaxed, the lines around his eyes softening as he laughed at Tom's increasingly tall tales. I swear on my mother's grave, Tom was saying. That snake was 20 feet if it was an inch, thick around as my thigh. Your mother's still alive in Amarillo, Jake pointed out. Well, when she does pass, God willing that's many years hence, I'll swear on her grave then. The men roared with laughter. Clara found herself watching Wyatt, the way his whole face changed when he smiled. He caught her looking and raised his cup of coffee in a silent toast. She felt heat rise in her cheeks and busied herself with cutting more pie. After the meal, Jake struck up a livelier tune. Tom grabbed Samuel and attempted to demonstrate what he claimed was a proper Virginia reel, though it looked more like two bears wrestling. Clara laughed until her sides hurt. Dance with me. She looked up to find Wyatt standing beside her chair, hand extended. The barn suddenly seemed very quiet, though Jake's fiddle still sang. "I don't know the steps," Clara said. "Neither do I. We'll figure it out." She took his hand. Let him pull her to her feet. His other hand settled at her waist. "Proper as you please." But Clara felt the touch like a brand through her dress. They moved slowly, finding their rhythm. Clara was aware of eyes on them, Tom's knowing grin. Jake's raised eyebrows, but mostly she was aware of Wyatt, the warmth of him, the solid strength, the way he guided her with gentle pressure. "You've surprised me, Clara Hensley," he said quietly. "For her ears alone." "How so?" "Thought you'd last maybe a week. City woman, soft hands, used to comfort." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "But you're tougher than rawhide and twice as determined. Never met a woman, never met anyone who works like you do." "Flattery, Mr. Cade." "Truth, Miss Hensley." He spun her gently, and she laughed. "That barn's just the latest proof. You see something that needs doing, you do it, no complaints, no waiting for someone else to handle it." "I told you I don't like being idle." "It's more than that." He pulled her slightly closer, still maintaining propriety but reducing the space between them. "You make things better. The ranch, the meals, He paused. "The days." Clara's breath caught. "Wyatt." "I know." His jaw tightened. "I know what we are to each other, what we have to be, but tonight, just for tonight, can we pretend otherwise?" She should say no, should step back, make some excuse, retreat to the safety of proper boundaries. Instead, she let herself lean into him, just a little. "Yes," she whispered. They danced until Jake's fingers grew tired, until Tom and Samuel made their excuses and headed for the bunkhouse. Then it was just the two of them in the lantern-lit barn, surrounded by the evidence of Clara's hard work. "I have something for you," Wyatt said suddenly. He disappeared outside, returning with a wrapped bundle. "Figured you were due for it." Clara unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was fabric-soft cotton in a deep blue that would match her eyes. Enough for a new dress. Beside it was a length of yellow ribbon and a small sewing kit. "My clothes are fine," she said, though her fingers stroked the fabric unconsciously. "They're work clothes. Good for what you do here, but—" He shrugged. "Thought you might want something nice. Something that fits proper." The echo of his mother's words, built like a field hand, hung between them. Clara blinked hard against the sudden sting in her eyes. "Not because you need to be different," Wyatt added quickly. "Just because you deserve nice things, because you've earned them." "Thank you," Clara managed. "It's beautiful." "There's more." He seemed almost embarrassed now. "Bottom of the bundle." She found it a small leather-bound journal and a new pen. "What's this for?" "Seen you scratching figures on scraps of paper, keeping track of supplies and such. Figured you could use something proper for your records." He rubbed the back of his neck. "If you want to keep doing the ordering, that is, you're better at it than I ever was." Clara clutched the gifts to her chest, overwhelmed. They weren't romantic presents, nothing that would cause talk if anyone knew, but they were thoughtful, practical, chosen by someone who'd been paying attention to her needs and habits. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll make yourself that dress. Say you'll keep that journal and help me figure out why we're spending so much on flour." His voice dropped. "Say you'll stay." "Wyatt?" "I know Edith King's making noise. I know people are talking, but I don't care. Clara, let them talk." "You have to care. This ranch is your life." "No." He stepped closer. "This ranch is my work. There's a difference." They stood there, the gifts between them like a barrier. Clara could hear her heart beating, could feel the warmth radiating from him. One step, that's all it would take. One step and she'd be in his arms again. And this time, it wouldn't be for dancing. A rumble of thunder broke the spell. They both looked toward the door. where clouds were gathering on the horizon. "Another storm coming," Wyatt said unnecessarily. "Seems like they follow me," Clara replied, trying for lightness. "Maybe they do." He looked back at her. "But you weather them well." More thunder. Closer now. The first drops of rain began to fall, pattering on the barn's new roof. "I should go," Clara said. "Early morning tomorrow." "Every morning's early for you." She smiled. "Rancher's hours." "You've taken to them like you were born to it." "Maybe I just took a while to find my place." Wyatt's expression softened. "Clara, thank you for the gifts," she said quickly. "I'll put them to good use." She moved past him toward the door, but he caught her arm gently. "Wait." The rain was falling harder now, turning the yard between buildings into a muddy expanse. Wyatt shrugged out of his coat and draped it around her shoulders. "Can't have you catching cold," he said. "Who'd make breakfast?" "Heaven forbid you'd have to go back to your own cooking." "Rather eat my boots." She laughed, pulling the coat closer. It smelled like him leather and soap and something uniquely Wyatt. "I'll return it tomorrow." "Keep it as long as you need." They stood in the barn doorway, watching the rain fall. The silence was comfortable, weighted with things unsaid but understood. Finally. Clara took a breath and plunged into the storm, running for the bunkhouse. She made it inside just as the sky truly opened up. Through her window, she could see Wyatt still standing in the barn doorway, a solitary figure backlit by lantern light. He stayed there a long time, until finally the light went out and darkness swallowed him. Clara hung his coat carefully on a peg, then sat on her bed with her gifts. The fabric was finer than anything she'd owned in years. The journal's pages were crisp and clean, waiting for her careful figures. Such simple things, but chosen with such care. She pressed her face into the fabric and let a few tears fall. Not from sadness, but from a feeling too big to name. For the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, she felt truly seen. Not as the too tall spinster or the desperate bride or the hired help, but as herself, Clara, valuable and valued. Thunder shook the walls of the little bunkhouse, but inside, Clara felt nothing but warm. The afternoon storm had been building for hours, dark clouds piling up like mountains against the western sky. Clara felt it in her bones, the way the air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on everything. She'd learned to read the weather in her weeks at the Double C, a useful skill when laundry needed bringing in and windows needed closing. She was in the barn, checking on the supplies she'd organized there, when the first fat raindrops began to fall. Within minutes, the gentle patter became a roar. Wind howled through the gaps in the walls, and thunder rolled across the plains like God's own wagon wheels. Clara moved deeper into the barn, away from the door where rain was already blowing in. She'd waited out these sudden storms rarely lasted long, but this one seemed different, angrier. Lightning split the sky in jagged tears, each flash followed immediately by thunder that shook the rafters. She was checking the latches on the feed bins when she heard the barn door bang open. Wyatt stood there, water streaming from his hat, scanning the interior. "Clara!" He spotted her and strode over, relief evident on his face. "Saw you head this way earlier. Wanted to make sure you hadn't tried to run back to the house." "I know better than to run through lightning," she said, "though you apparently don't." He grinned, unrepentant. "Couldn't have you thinking I'd leave you to weather this alone." Another crack of thunder, so loud Clara instinctively stepped closer to him. The barn shuddered, and somewhere above them, something scraped across the roof. "That didn't sound good," she said. "Old cottonwood out back? Probably lost a branch." Wyatt moved to the small window, peering out. "We'll be fine. This barn's solid now. Thanks to you." They found seats on grain sacks, settling in to wait. The storm raged outside, turning the world into a chaos of water and wind. But inside, in the circle of lamplight, there was an odd sense of peace, Never did like storms. Clara admitted, even as a girl, something about all that power, wild and uncontrolled. They're necessary, Wyatt said. Bring the rain we need, clear the air, but I understand. Makes a person feel small. Yes, she looked at him. Though feeling small isn't always bad. Sometimes it's a relief, knowing you're not responsible for everything. He was quiet for a moment. That why you answered Marshall's advertisement to feel less responsible? It was the first time either of them had mentioned Marshall since that first night. Clara considered her answer. Partly after Papa died, then Mama. I was all that was left. Ran the boarding house because it's what they'd built, what they'd wanted. But it was never mine. Not really. Just another duty. She smiled wryly. Thought being a wife would be simpler. Follow instead of lead for once. Would have been wasted on Marshall King. Yes, she met his eyes. It would have been... Lightning flashed, illuminating Wyatt's face for an instant. In that brief moment, Clara saw something raw in his expression, something hungry. Then darkness returned, and with it, careful distance. What about you? She asked. Why stay alone so long, handsome rancher with a good spread? You must have had opportunities. Handsome. There was amusement in his voice. Don't fish for compliments. Mr. Cade. He chuckled. Fair enough. And yes, there were opportunities. Martha Kellum made her interest known more than once. Few others, too. But none of them saw the ranch. They saw the idea of it, the security it represented. They'd have wanted to change things, civilize it, make it proper. He paused. I never wanted proper. I wanted real. Thunder crashed again, closer this time. The lamp flickered, and Clara found herself holding her breath. The air between them felt charged, electric as the storm outside. Is that what this is? She asked quietly. Real? The realest thing I've known in years. They sat in silence, the weight of that admission settling around them like dust. Clara knew they were balanced on a knife's edge, one breath away from changing everything. Part of her wanted to retreat, to make some practical comment about the weather or tomorrow's meals. The safer part. But the brave part, the part that had traveled 1,000 miles on a promise, that had faced down Edith King and rebuilt a barn with her bare hands, that part wanted to leap. A tremendous crack of lightning struck nearby. The thunder instantaneous and deafening. Clara gasped, instinctively reaching out. Wyatt caught her hands, held them steady. It's all right, he said. Just noise and light. But he didn't let go. His thumbs brushed over her knuckles. Callous meeting callous. Working hands, both of them. Honest hands. Clara. Her name was barely audible over the storm. I need to tell you something. She waited, heart hammering against her ribs. I've been thinking about sending you away. At her sharp intake of breath, he squeezed her hands. Not because I want to, because I should. For your reputation, your future, you could start fresh somewhere else. Without the talk. Without you. Yes. Clara pulled her hands free and stood abruptly. You don't get to make that choice for me. Clara. No. She paced to the window, staring out at the storm-dark world. Everyone else has tried to decide what's best for me. My parents, well-meaning as they were. Marshall and his mother. Even Martha Kellum with her careful warnings. She turned back to him. I'm 28 years old. Wyatt, old enough to know my own mind. And what does your mind tell you? She crossed back to him, standing close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. It tells me I'm tired of being careful, tired of doing what's expected instead of what's right. This might not be right either. Maybe not. She took a breath, steady as she could make it. But it's true. He stood slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might spook her. They faced each other in the lamplight while the storm raged on. Nature's fury, a backdrop to their own careful navigation. "If you stay," Wyatt said, "things will get harder. Edith King won't give up. The talk will get worse."
"Let it."
"Your reputation is already ruined by their standards. Might as well be ruined for something real." He reached up, touched her cheek with infinite gentleness. "You sure?" Instead of answering, Clara leaned into his touch. It was such a small movement, but it shattered the last wall between them. Wyatt made a sound, part sigh, part surrender, and pulled her close. The kiss was nothing like she'd imagined during those lonely nights in the bunkhouse. It was better, real. His lips were warm and sure, and Clara felt her knees actually buckle, just like the silly heroines in the novels she'd hidden under her pillow as a girl. But this wasn't silly. This was earthquake and lightning, foundation shaking and sky splitting all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the storm had gentled to steady rain. "Well," Clara said, then had to stop and clear her throat. "That was—" "Yeah." Wyatt's hands were still at her waist, like he couldn't quite let go. "Clara, don't." She pressed a finger to his lips. "Don't apologize or analyze or make promises. Not yet. Let's just let this be what it is." He kissed her finger, then caught her hand and held it against his chest. She could feel his heart racing, matching her own. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," Clara smiled, feeling reckless and free. "Now we wait for the rain to stop. Then I go back to the bunkhouse, and you go back to the main house. Tomorrow, I'll make breakfast, and you'll work the ranch. Same as always. Except we'll know. We'll know this is here, between us, real and true and ours." She pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes. "That's enough for now, isn't it?" He studied her face like he was memorizing it. "If you say so." "I do." But she couldn't resist leaning in for one more kiss. Quick and sweet. "Though we might need to fix that roof tomorrow. Pretty sure I heard shingles coming loose." Wyatt laughed, the sound rich and full, practical to the end. "Someone has to be." They stayed in the barn until the storm passed completely, talking about safe things, the ranch, the coming harvest, plans for winter supplies. But underneath the normal conversation ran a current of awareness, electric as the lightning that had brought them together. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, painting everything gold and new, they walked back to their respective quarters. At the door of the bunkhouse, Wyatt caught her hand one more time. "No regrets?" he asked. Clara squeezed his fingers. "None. You—" "Only that the storm didn't last longer." She laughed and went inside, closing the door gently behind her. Through the window, she watched him walk back to the main house, his stride easy and confident. Everything had changed. Nothing had changed. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, Edith King's gossip, the ranch hand's knowing looks, the careful dance of propriety they'd have to maintain. But for now, Clara touched her lips where his had been and smiled. The thunder might have shaken the walls, but it was Wyatt's kiss that had shaken her foundations, and for the first time in her careful, dutiful life, she was glad to feel the ground shift beneath her feet. The whispers started small, like sparks in dry grass. Clara noticed them first at the general store, where conversations halted mid-sentence when she entered. Eyes followed her movements as she selected flour and salt, and behind her back, the murmuring resumed. She kept her head high, paid for her goods, and loaded the wagon without acknowledging the stares, but she could feel them burning into her back like brands. "That's her," she heard someone whisper. "The one living in sin out at the Double C." Sin? Clara almost laughed at the irony. If they only knew how careful she and Wyatt had been since that storm in the barn, how they maintained perfect propriety during daylight hours, how she still slept in the bunkhouse, how the most they allowed themselves were fleeting touches when passing dishes at meals. But Dustwater didn't need truth when speculation was so much more entertaining. The second week after the storm, Martha Kellum paid a visit. Clara saw her wagon approaching and steeled herself for confrontation. But Martha's face was concerned rather than condemning when she climbed down from her seat. "Miss Hensley, might we speak privately?" Clara led her to the barn, now her sanctuary of sorts. Martha looked around appreciatively at the organized space before turning serious eyes on Clara. "The talk's getting ugly," Martha said without preamble. "Edith King's been holding court at every social gathering, painting you as some kind of, well, as a woman of loose morals who's bewitched poor Wyatt Cade." "Poor Wyatt?" Clara couldn't help the dry tone. "He seems to be bearing up well under my bewitchment." Martha's lips twitched. "I'm sure he is. But Clara, may I call you Clara? This isn't a joke. Edith's got the ear of several town councilmen. There's talk of ordinances about unmarried women living on ranch property. They can't be serious. Serious as a drought in July." Martha studied her. "I like you, Clara. You've got backbone. And Lord knows this town could use more women who aren't afraid of honest work. But Edith King doesn't forgive easily. And she blames you for humiliating her son." Marshall humiliated himself. "True, but that's not how she sees it." Martha paused. "She came to see me yesterday. Wanted to know if I'd be interested in resuming my friendship with Wyatt Cade. Said it would be better for everyone if he had a proper woman's influence." Clara's hands clenched involuntarily, and I told her that Wyatt already had all the influence he needed. Martha smiled. She didn't care for that answer. "Thank you," Clara said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. This is far from over." Martha moved toward the door, then turned back. "A word of advice. Whatever's between you and Wyatt, and don't bother denying it. I've got eyes make it official. Soon. Take away their ammunition." After Martha left, Clara stood in the barn for a long time, thinking, make it official, as if it were that simple, as if she could walk up to Wyatt and suggest marriage like she was proposing a new feeding schedule for the horses. She was still brooding when she served supper that night. The hands ate quickly and scattered, sensing the tension. Soon it was just her and Wyatt at the table, the silence heavy between them. "Martha came by," Clara said finally. "I know. Saw her wagon." Wyatt pushed his barely touched plate away. "What did she want?" "To warn me. The talk's getting worse." "I've heard." His jaw tightened. "Tom got an earful in town yesterday. Some folks saying I'm no better than I should be. Keeping a woman here for convenience." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "What did Tom say?" "Nothing repeatable in mixed company." A ghost of a smile crossed Wyatt's face. "But I believe Edith King's ears are still burning." "This is my fault," Clara said. "If I hadn't come here—" "Don't." Wyatt's hand covered hers on the table. "Don't you dare take responsibility for small-minded gossips with nothing better to do than judge others. But your reputation has survived worse than Edith King's poisoned tongue." He turned her hand over, tracing the calluses on her palm. "Clara, I need to ask you something." Her heart jumped. Was he going to propose here, now, in the kitchen with dirty dishes still on the table? "There's a barn dance Saturday night," he continued, "at the Morrison place. Whole county's invited." Clara blinked. "A dance?" "I'd like to take you publicly. Let everyone see that I'm not ashamed of you being here, that we've got nothing to hide." "Wyatt, that could make things worse." "Or it could show them that their gossip doesn't matter to us." His thumb brushed over her wrist. "What do you say?" Clara thought about walking into a barn full of people who'd been whispering about her for weeks, about facing down Edith King and her circle of supporters, about dancing with Wyatt while the whole county watched and judged. "I'll need to finish that dress," she said. His face broke into a true smile. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." Saturday came too quickly. Clara spent every spare moment working on the blue dress, her fingers flying over the fabric. It wasn't fancy, she didn't have time for fancy, but it fit properly, emphasizing her height rather than hiding it. The yellow ribbon made a simple belt, adding a touch of brightness. She was adjusting the collar when a knock came at the bunkhouse door. She opened it to find Wyatt standing there in his Sunday best, holding a small box. "You're early," she said, suddenly nervous. "Wanted to give you this before we left." He handed her the box. "Thought it might go with the dress." Inside was a simple silver comb, decorated with tiny flowers. Nothing expensive or showy, but pretty in its simplicity. "It was my mother's," Wyatt said quietly. "Been sitting in a drawer for years. Seemed ashamed to let it go unused." Clara's throat tightened. "Wyatt, I can't—" "You can." He took the comb and gently secured it in her hair. "There, perfect." They stood there a moment, his hands still framing her face. Then he stepped back, offering his arm formally. "Miss Hensley, would you do me the honor?" "The honor's mine, Mr. Cade." The ride to the Morrison Ranch was quiet, both of them aware of what they were about to face. Clara could hear the music and voices before they even reached the barn, and her stomach knotted with anxiety. "We don't have to do this," Wyatt said, sensing her tension. "Yes, we do." Clara straightened her spine. "I'm not hiding anymore." Their entrance caused a predictable stir. Conversations faltered, heads turned, and Clara could practically feel the weight of collective judgment. Then Tom appeared at their side, grinning broadly. "About time you two showed up. Jake's been murdering that fiddle for an hour." He offered Clara his arm. "Might I escort you to the refreshment table, Miss Clara Wyatt? Go make yourself useful and help with the barrel they're bringing in." It was a kindness. Clara realized Tom was publicly aligning himself with them, making it clear where his loyalties lay. As they crossed the barn, Samuel and Jake fell in beside them, creating a protective phalanx against the stairs. "You look real fine, Miss Clara," Jake said earnestly. "That blue brings out your eyes." "Thank you, Jake." Clara squeezed his arm. "You clean up pretty well yourself." They'd barely reached the refreshment table when Edith King materialized, flanked by her usual coterie. She looked Clara up and down with a sneer that could have curdled fresh milk. "Miss Hensley, how brave of you to show your face here." Mrs. King," Clara kept her voice pleasant. "Lovely evening for a dance." "Indeed, though some of us maintain certain standards about who we associate with." Edith's eyes glittered with malice. "Tell me, does Wyatt pay you extra for evening work?" The barn seemed to hold its breath. Clara felt rage rise in her throat, hot and choking. But before she could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Edith King, you venomous old biddy!" Everyone turned to see Agnes Morrison, their hostess, bearing down on them like an avenging angel. Agnes was 70 if she was a day, but she commanded respect through sheer force of personality. "You're in my barn, at my dance, insulting my guests." Agnes continued, "I'll thank you to keep a civil tongue or find yourself another place to spread your poison." Edith flushed. "Agnes, surely you can't approve of what a hard-working woman earning honest wages, a good man finally having help on his ranch." Agnes turned to Clara. "My dear, I've been meaning to thank you for that remedy you gave Ben Morrison for his cough. Cleared it right up." Clara blinked. She'd given Ben some honey and whiskey mixture weeks ago, barely thinking about it. "I'm glad it helped." Helped. It was a miracle. Agnes linked arms with Clara, effectively dismissing Edith. "Now, let me introduce you to some folks who appreciate a woman with sense." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Agnes's approval seemed to turn the tide. Suddenly, Clara found herself surrounded by ranchers' wives asking about remedies and recipes, younger women admiring her dress, men nodding respectfully when Wyatt brought her punch. They danced 3 times, each dance a little closer, a little less careful. By the 3rd, Clara had stopped caring about the watching eyes, lost in the simple pleasure of moving with him to the music. "Thank you," she said as they swayed together. "For what?" "For this, for fighting for us." His hand tightened on her waist. "Clara, I'd fight the whole world for you." The words were quiet, meant only for her, but they rang through Clara like church bells. She looked up at him, saw the truth written plain on his face, and felt her last defenses crumble. "I love you too," she whispered. His step faltered. "Clara, I know, wrong place, wrong time, but I needed you to know." The music ended before he could respond. They separated, applauding politely. But Clara could feel the tension radiating from him. When he escorted her outside for air a few minutes later, she knew what was coming. "We need to talk," he said. "I know." But instead of talking, he backed her gently against the barn wall and kissed her like a drowning man seeking air. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were wild. "Marry me," he said. Clara's heart stopped. "What?" "Marry me. Tomorrow. Tonight. As soon as we can find a preacher." He cupped her face in his hands. "I'm done with careful. Clara, done with pretending I don't love you more than breath. Marry me and let them all choke on their gossip." She should ask for time to think, should point out the practical concerns, the rushed nature of such a decision, should do a dozen sensible things. Instead, she said, "Yes." His smile could have lit the whole county. He kissed her again, softer this time, sealing the promise between them. When they finally returned to the dance, disheveled and glowing, Agnes Morrison took one look at them and clapped her hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," she called out, "I do believe we have an announcement." And standing there in a barn full of neighbors and gossips, holding tight to Wyatt's hand, Clara announced her engagement to the man who'd offered her shelter in a storm and become her home. Edith King's face went purple, but her sputtering was drowned out by Tom's whoop of joy and the thunder of applause that followed. The thunder that shook the walls this time was of their own making, and Clara weathered it with a smile. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of shouting. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, she thought she was dreaming. Then the acrid scent hit her fully, and she bolted upright. "Fire!" She threw on her wrapper and boots, not bothering with proper dress, and burst out of the bunkhouse. The sight that greeted her made her stomach drop. The main barn was ablaze, flames licking up the sides and eating through the roof she'd helped repair just weeks ago. "Clara!" Wyatt's voice cut through the chaos. He was leading Cherokee out, the horse's eyes rolling white with fear. "Get back!" But Clara was already running toward the barn. "The other horses!" Tom and Jake were inside, trying to free the panicked animals. Samuel was working the water pump, but his efforts were like spitting at a wildfire. Clara grabbed a blanket from the fence, dunked it in the water trough, and threw it over her head before plunging into the smoke. The heat hit her like a physical blow. She could barely see through the thick smoke, but she knew this barn like her own hands. 3 stalls left 2 mares and the new foal. The horses were screaming, terrible sounds that would haunt her dreams. "Easy, easy," she crooned, though her own voice shook. She fumbled with the first stall latch, finally got it open. The mare bolted past her, nearly knocking her down. 2 more. The smoke was getting thicker, settling in her lungs like molten lead. Every breath was agony. She found the second stall by feel, yanked it open. The mare inside was frozen with terror. Wouldn't move. "Come on." Clara grabbed the halter, pulled with all her strength. "Move!" Someone appeared beside her Jake, his face black with soot. Together they got the mare moving, drove her toward the door. One more, the foal. But when Clara turned back, a burning beam crashed down, blocking the path. The foal's cries rose above the roar of flames, pitiful and terrified. "Clara, no!" Wyatt's voice, somewhere behind her. "Get out!" She couldn't leave it. Couldn't. She dropped to her knees, trying to find a way under the beam. The smoke was so thick now she couldn't see at all, could only feel the scorching heat and hear that awful crying. Strong hands grabbed her, hauled her backward. She fought, coughing and cursing, but Wyatt was stronger. He dragged her out of the barn and into the blessed cool air, where she collapsed on the ground, retching and gasping. "The foal," she wheezed. "The foal is out." Tom knelt beside her, his weathered face grim. "Jake got her. She's scared but safe." Clara looked around, blinking smoke tears from her eyes. All the horses were huddled at the far end of the corral. Tom's wife, Mary, trying to calm them. The barn, though the barn was lost. Even as she watched, part of the roof caved in, sending up a shower of sparks. "How?" she asked. Wyatt's face was carved from stone. "We'll find out." They fought the fire until dawn, forming a bucket brigade to keep it from spreading to the other buildings. By the time the sun rose, the barn was nothing but smoldering ruins, black beams pointing at the sky like accusing fingers. Clara sat on the porch steps, exhausted and filthy. Her throat felt like she'd swallowed glass, and her hands were blistered from the bucket handles. But they'd saved the horses. That was what mattered. "Here." Wyatt handed her a cup of water, then sat beside her. His shirt was ruined, his face streaked with soot, but his eyes were alert, scanning the wreckage. "This wasn't an accident," he said quietly. Clara had been thinking the same thing. The fire had started in multiple places. She'd seen the separate blazes as they fought to contain them. "Who would do this?" He didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. They both knew who had reason to want them hurt, who'd been making threats, but knowing and proving were different things. Sheriff Patterson arrived mid-morning, a thin man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He poked through the ruins half-heartedly, asked a few questions, then shrugged. "Could have been anything. Lamp knocked over, spontaneous combustion in the hay. These things happen." "In 3 places at once." Wyatt's voice was dangerously quiet. Patterson shifted uncomfortably. "Now, Wyatt, you can't go making accusations without proof. That's serious business." "So is arson." "Like I said, no proof." The sheriff settled his hat. "I'll file a report, but unless someone saw something..." He left with obvious relief. Clara watched him go, fury building in her chest. They all knew, everyone knew, but the Kings had money and influence, and the Double C just had truth. "I'll rebuild," Wyatt said. "Insurance will cover some of it." "We'll rebuild," Clara corrected. "And this time, we'll post guards." He looked at her, taking in her soot-stained wrapper, her tangled hair, the fierce set of her jaw. "You could have died going in there." "So could you. So could any of us." She met his gaze steadily. "That's what we do for what's ours. Isn't it? We fight for it." Something shifted in his expression. He reached out, tucked a strand of her smoke-scented hair behind her ear. "Ours," he repeated softly. "Yes." Clara caught his hand, held it tight. "They wanted to break us, make me run, make you give up. But they don't know us very well, do they?" "No," Wyatt agreed. "They don't." Agnes Morrison arrived an hour later with a wagon full of supplies and a face like thunder. "Heard what happened. Also heard that fool Patterson isn't doing anything about it." "Can't prove anything," Clara said wearily. "Don't need to prove it in court to know what's what." Agnes directed her sons to start unloading. "Brought lumber, nails, whatever we could spare. The Hendersons are bringing more. Miller family, too." Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Agnes, we can't." "Can't what accept help from neighbors. Don't be proud. Girl, whole county's talking about what you did. Running into that fire. Jake's been telling everyone how you saved that mare." Agnes patted her shoulder. "Sometimes doing right pays back in ways you don't expect." By afternoon, the yard was full of wagons. Ranchers from miles around had come. bringing supplies and willing hands. Even some townspeople showed up, the decent ones who'd never cottoned to Edith King's poison. Clara worked alongside them, clearing debris and salvaging what they could. Her throat hurt and her eyes streamed, but she wouldn't stop. This was her home now, her fight. "You should rest," Mary Morrison said, catching Clara as she swayed. "You breathed in a lot of smoke?" "I'm fine." "You're not, but I understand." Mary handed her a wet cloth. "At least wipe your face. You look like a chimney sweep." Clara managed a laugh, though it turned into a cough. She was wiping the worst of the soot away when she saw the buggy approaching. Her stomach clenched as she recognized the occupants. Marshall and Edith King, come to survey their handiwork. The yard went quiet as they pulled up. Edith stayed in the buggy, but Marshall climbed down, his face pale beneath his hat. "Wyatt," he said, "I heard about the fire. Terrible thing." "Yes," Wyatt said evenly. "Terrible." Marshall shifted nervously. "I wanted to say that his mother and I—" "Come to gloat." Clara stepped forward, ignoring Mary's restraining hand. "Come to see if your plan worked." "I don't know what you mean." But Marshall couldn't meet her eyes. "Don't you?" Clara moved closer, and Marshall actually backed up a step. 3 separate fires. Marshall, in the middle of the night, just after your mother spent weeks telling everyone how I was a threat to the moral fabric of Dustwater. "Clara!" Wyatt's voice held a warning, but she was past caring. "You couldn't stand it, could you, that I found something better than you? That I'm happy here, so you had to try and burn it down?" "That's that slander," Edith King's shrill voice cut through the air. "How dare you accuse us? How dare you?" Clara rounded on her. "How dare you sneak onto our land in the night like cowards? How dare you risk innocent animals' lives because your pride was hurt?" "We didn't," Marshall started. "Get off my land!" Wyatt's voice was quiet, but it carried, "Both of you, now!" "This isn't over," Edith spat. "We'll sue for defamation. You'll leave." Agnes Morrison stepped forward, and behind her, the assembled neighbors formed a silent wall. "Or would you like me to share what my grandson saw sneaking away from the Double C last night? 2 riders, he said, 1 tall, 1 short, heading back toward town." The color drained from Marshall's face. Edith went red, then white. "You can't prove anything," she said, but her voice lacked its usual venom. "Maybe not in court," Tom said conversationally. "But folks around here have long memories. Be a shame if every ranch in the county suddenly couldn't find time to do business with King supporters." It was a threat and a promise rolled into one. The Kings looked around at the assembled faces hard, honest people who'd had enough of their poison. "Get in the buggy, Marshall," Edith said tightly. They left without another word. But Clara could see the defeat in the set of Marshall's shoulders. They wouldn't be back. As the buggy disappeared down the road, a cheer went up from the assembled workers. Someone clapped Clara on the back, making her cough again. "Inside with you," Wyatt said firmly. "Mary, can you?" "I'll see to her." Mary took Clara's arm. "Come on, dear. Let's get some honey tea in you for that throat." Clara let herself be led away, exhaustion finally catching up. Behind them, she could hear Wyatt organizing work crews, planning the new barn. It would be bigger this time. Better. They'd learned from this. Inside, Mary fussed over her, making tea and checking her for burns. Clara submitted to the mothering, too tired to protest. "You did a brave thing," Mary said. "Stupid, maybe, but brave." "The horses would have been a tragic loss, but not worth your life." Mary studied her. "Though I suspect Wyatt feels differently. Never seen a man look so terrified as when he dragged you out of that barn." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm mug, remembering the desperation in his grip, the way his hands had shaken as he checked her for injuries. "We're getting married," she said, "soon as we can arrange it." Mary smiled. Good. This ranch needs a proper mistress, and Wyatt needs someone who'll fight alongside him, not just decorate his parlor. I'm not much for decorating. No, Mary agreed. You're much better than that. By evening, the skeleton of a new barn was already rising from the ashes. Clara watched from the porch, wrapped in a blanket, as the men worked by lantern light. The horses were settled in a temporary corral, the foal pressed close to her mother's side. They'd survived. More than that, they'd won. The community had rallied around them, chosen them over the king's money and influence. It felt like a new beginning. Wyatt found her there as the workers were leaving. He sat beside her, smelling of sawdust and smoke. How's the throat? Better. Her voice was still raspy, but the honey tea had helped. How's the barn? Coming along. Be better than before when we're done. He took her hand. Clara, what you did was necessary, was reckless, brave and noble and absolutely terrifying. He brought her hand to his lips. Promise me something. What? No more running into burning buildings. Clara smiled. I'll promise if you will. Deal. He sealed it with a kiss, gentle against her smoke-chapped lips. They sat together as darkness fell completely, watching the stars come out over their scorched but undefeated land. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges. The kings might try again, or they might slink away to nurse their wounds. Either way, Clara and Wyatt would face it together. The thunder had passed. The fire had been weathered. What remained was stronger for the testing, like good steel, forged in flame and tempered by trial. I love you, Clara said into the quiet night. I love you too, Wyatt replied, smoke and soot and all. She laughed, though it made her cough. Romance isn't your strong suit, Mr. Cade. Good thing I've got other qualities. Yes, Clara agreed, leaning into his warmth. Very good thing. The new barn rose from the ashes like a phoenix, stronger and grander than before. 3 weeks had passed since the fire, and the community's support hadn't wavered. Every day brought new volunteers, new supplies, new proof that the Double C Ranch had allies worth having. Clara stood in the main house kitchen, kneading bread and watching through the window as Wyatt directed the placement of the last roof beams. His movements were sure and economical, a man in his element. She found herself smiling at the sight. You're glowing, Mary Morrison observed from her seat at the table, where she was mending one of Wyatt's shirts. She'd taken to visiting regularly, claiming Clara needed watching after all that smoke inhalation. It's the heat from the oven. Clara deflected, but her smile widened. Mm-hmm. Mary's eyes twinkled. Nothing to do with a certain rancher who can't keep his eyes off you. As if to prove her point, Wyatt glanced toward the house just then. Even from a distance, Clara could see his face soften when he spotted her in the window. She waved, flour-dusted hand leaving prints on the glass. When's the wedding? Mary asked. Next month. Judge Carter's agreed to come out from the county seat. Clara shaped the dough into loaves. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends. And no kings. Definitely no kings. Clara's voice hardened slightly, though they've been remarkably quiet lately. Agnes says Edith's been keeping to her house, and Marshall. Mary shrugged. Word is he's thinking of moving to Denver. Fresh start. Good. Clara meant it. She bore Marshall no real ill will. He was weak, not evil. It was his mother who'd fanned the flames of spite into actual flames. Maybe away from his mother's influence, he'll find some backbone. A knock at the door interrupted them. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it, finding Agnes Morrison on the porch with a large box. Delivery, Agnes announced, bustling inside. And before you protest, it's not charity, it's a wedding gift. Clara opened the box carefully, then gasped. Inside was a dress not white, which would have been impractical, but a deep green silk that shimmered in the light. It was simply cut but beautifully made, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Agnes, this is too much. Nonsense. Every bride needs something special for her wedding day. Agnes's gruff voice couldn't hide her pleasure. Besides, my daughter-in-law made it. She's been wanting to thank you for that stomach remedy you gave her last month. Clara touched the fabric reverently. She'd been planning to wear her blue dress, the one she'd made from Wyatt's gift. But this was the kind of dress she'd never thought to own. Thank you, she whispered, blinking back tears. None of that now. Agnes said briskly, Save the waterworks for the wedding? Speaking of which, we need to discuss food. I'm thinking beef roast, obviously, and my famous apple pies. The women spent the next hour planning, their chatter filling the kitchen with warmth. It was so different from Clara's original vision of her wedding. No grand church, no extended family, no honeymoon trip to exotic places. But somehow, this felt more real, more right. As the sun began to sink, the workers called it a day. Clara had supper-ready beef stew and fresh bread, apple turnovers for dessert. The men ate with gusto, praising the meal and the progress on the barn equally. Should be ready for use by week's end. Tom declared, just in time for... He stopped, glancing at Wyatt. In time for what? Clara asked. Wyatt cleared his throat. I've been thinking about the ranch, the future, with the new barn and all the improvements. We could expand the operation, maybe add some breeding stock, diversify beyond just beef cattle. That's ambitious, Clara said carefully. And expensive. True, which is why I've been considering taking on a partner. He met her eyes across the table. An official partner. Someone with a stake in the success of the place. Understanding dawned. Wyatt. The papers are drawn up. He pulled a document from his jacket. Half ownership of the Double C Ranch. In your name, all it needs is your signature. The table went silent. Clara stared at the papers, then at Wyatt. You're giving me half your ranch. Our ranch, he corrected. Will be anyway. Once we're married. But this makes it legal from the start. You've earned it, Clara. Every board in that new barn, every improvement to this place, you've been a partner in everything but name. Time to make it official. Clara's hands shook as she took the papers. Her own name stared back at her from the legal text. Property owner, ranch partner. Not just Mrs. Wyatt Cade, but Clara Hensley, co-owner of the Double C. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Jake piped up, then blushed when everyone looked at him. I mean, begging your pardon, but seems like a good deal to me. Best decision Wyatt's made since hiring you, Tom added. Clara looked around the table at these men who'd become family, then back at Wyatt. His face was calm, but she could see the vulnerability in his eyes. This wasn't just about the ranch. This was about trust, partnership, a future built together on equal ground. Where do I sign? She asked. The cheer that went up could probably be heard in town. Wyatt came around the table to guide her hand to the right spot, his presence warm at her back. As she wrote her name with careful strokes, Clara felt something settle into place. This was home, truly and legally now. Well, Mary said, dabbing at her eyes, this calls for a celebration. Where's that whiskey Tom's still pretending he doesn't hide? The evening turned festive, with toasts and laughter and Jake's fiddle making an appearance. Clara found herself swept into an impromptu dance with Tom, then Samuel, then finally Wyatt, who held her closer than propriety strictly allowed. No regrets, he murmured in her ear. None, she assured him. Though you realize you've just given half your life's work to a woman who showed up with nothing but a muddy dress and broken promises. Best investment I ever made. He spun her gently. Besides, it was already yours. I'm just making it legal. They danced until the others began to drift away, heading for bunkhouse and town. Soon it was just the two of them in the kitchen, swaying to music only they could hear. "I should go," Clara said eventually, though she made no move to leave his arms. "Or you could stay." She pulled back to look at him. "Wyatt Cade, are you suggesting something improper?" "I'm suggesting," he said carefully, "that in 3 weeks you'll be my wife, and moving your things from the bunkhouse to here, might as well start getting used to the idea. The hands are all grown men who mind their own business." His hands tightened on her waist. "But if you're uncomfortable—" "I'm not." Clara surprised herself with the admission. "I'm tired of being careful, of worrying what people think. We've proven ourselves. Haven't we survived their worst?" "We have." "Then maybe it's time to stop living by their rules." Wyatt studied her face. "You're sure?" Instead of answering, Clara stretched up and kissed him. It was different from their stolen moments, deeper and more certain. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, she saw her own decision reflected in his eyes. "Stay," he said again, and this time it wasn't a suggestion. "Yes," Clara said simply. They moved through the house together, extinguishing lamps, banking the fire. Such ordinary tasks, but weighted with significance. At the stairs, Wyatt paused. "I want to do right by you, Clara, always." "You already have." She touched his cheek. "From that first day, when you offered shelter to a stranger. You've done right by me every day since." They climbed the stairs hand in hand, leaving the empty bunkhouse to its shadows. It had served its purpose, providing refuge and respectability when both were needed. But that time had passed. In the morning, Clara woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the sound of roosters crowing. For a moment, she was disoriented. Then she felt Wyatt's arm around her waist, his breath warm against her neck, and remembered. No shame, no regret, just a profound sense of rightness. She slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake him, and padded to the window. The new barn stood proud in the morning light, a testament to what community and determination could build. Beyond it, the ranch stretched to the horizon, their ranch now. "Come back to bed," Wyatt's sleepy voice called. "Too early for deep thoughts?" Clara smiled, but stayed at the window. "Just thinking about how much has changed. 6 weeks ago, I was nobody. No home, no prospects, no hope." She heard him get up, felt him come up behind her. His arms encircled her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "You were never nobody," he said firmly. "Just took a while to find where you belonged." "Here," Clara said, leaning into him. "I belong here." "Forever, if I have anything to say about it." They stood together watching the sun climb higher, painting their land gold. In 3 weeks, they'd make it official in the eyes of law and society. But here, now, in the quiet morning light, they were already what they would always be: partners, lovers, home. "We should get dressed," Clara said eventually. "The hands will be expecting breakfast." "Let them wait." Wyatt turned her to face him. "I want to spend a few more minutes appreciating the fact that Clara Hensley, future co-owner of the Double C Ranch, is standing in my bedroom in her nightgown." "Our bedroom," Clara corrected. "Our ranch, our life." "Our life," Wyatt agreed, and kissed her as the morning sun blessed their union. When they finally made it downstairs, properly dressed and presentable, Tom was already at the kitchen table with coffee. He took one look at them and grinned. "About time," was all he said. Clara felt herself blush, but held her head high. "Breakfast will be ready in 20 minutes. Take your time, Miss Clara. Some things are worth waiting for." As Clara bustled about the kitchen, Wyatt at her side helping as naturally as breathing, she thought Tom was right. Some things were indeed worth waiting for, and some things, once found, were worth fighting to keep. The thunder had led her here. The fire had tested them. And now the clear morning promised nothing but good things ahead. Clara Hensley, soon to be Clara Cade, co-owner of the Double C Ranch, was finally home. Spring had come again to the Double C Ranch, painting the prairie in shades of green and gold. Clara stood at the kitchen window, one hand resting on her growing belly, watching the storm clouds build on the horizon. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a familiar sound that no longer brought anxiety but rather a sense of coming home. "Storm's coming," Wyatt said from the doorway, his voice warm with the kind of contentment that comes from a year of married life. "Let it come," Clara replied, turning to smile at him. "The new barn can handle it." The barn had indeed weathered every storm since its rebuilding, standing strong against wind and rain, and even an early blizzard that had caught everyone by surprise. It had become something of a symbol for the ranch itself, tested by fire, rebuilt stronger, ready for whatever nature threw at it. Wyatt crossed to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands gentle on her rounded stomach. "How are you feeling?" "Like I swallowed a watermelon," Clara said honestly. "But Mary says that's normal for this stage." "2 more months," Wyatt murmured against her hair. Hard to believe. Hard to believe indeed. A year ago, Clara had been a desperate woman with nowhere to turn. Now she was Mrs. Wyatt Cade, co-owner of a thriving ranch, and soon to be a mother. The path from there to here seemed like something from a fairy tale. Except fairy tales rarely included so much mud and hard work. A knock at the door interrupted their quiet moment. Clara found Tom on the porch, hat in hand, looking unusually formal. "Sorry to bother you, Miss Clara, but there's someone here to see you. Says it's important." Clara frowned. They weren't expecting anyone. "Who is it?" "Woman from town, Mrs. King." Clara's blood ran cold. Beside her, she felt Wyatt tense. They hadn't heard from the King since the fire, had assumed that chapter was closed. "I'll send her away," Wyatt said. "No." Clara straightened her spine. "Let's hear what she has to say. Tom, please show her in." Edith King looked smaller than Clara remembered. The months had not been kind to her. Her face was drawn, her usually impeccable appearance showing signs of neglect. She entered the parlor with none of her former imperious bearing. "Mrs. Cade," she said, and Clara was surprised to hear no mockery in the title. "Mr. Cade. Thank you for seeing me." "What do you want, Edith?" Wyatt's voice was cold. The older woman flinched. "I came to make amends, if such a thing is possible." Clara and Wyatt exchanged glances. "Go on," Clara said carefully. "Marshall left for Denver 3 months ago." Edith began. "He writes sometimes. He's working as a clerk, living in a boarding house. He seems happier, away from me." She paused, seeming to gather herself. "I've had time to think, these past months, about what I did, what I drove him to do." She looked directly at Clara. "The fire was my idea. I harangued him into it, played on his pride and hurt feelings. He didn't want to, but I—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I was so angry, so certain I was right." "You could have killed someone," Clara said quietly. "The horses, the men fighting the fire, me." "I know." Edith's voice was barely a whisper. "I think about it every night. What might have happened when I heard you ran into the burning barn to save the animals." She shook her head. "You could have died because of my spite." Wyatt stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "Why are you telling us this now?" "Because I'm leaving Dustwater, selling the house, moving to my sister's in California." Edith reached into her bag, pulled out an envelope. "This doesn't make up for anything, but it's the insurance payout I collected for some property damage after the storm last year. I want you to have it, for the barn rebuilding costs." Clara stared at the envelope. "We don't want your money." "I know, but please, let me do this one thing." Edith's eyes filled with tears. I destroyed my relationship with my son. I nearly destroyed your lives. I can't undo any of it, but I can at least try to make some small restitution." Clara looked at Wyatt, saw him struggling with the same mix of emotions she felt: anger at what had been done, pity for the broken woman before them, uncertainty about how to respond. "We'll donate it," Clara said finally, "to the school building fund, in Marshall's name." Edith's face crumpled. "Thank you. That's kind of you." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "I hope your child never knows the kind of bitterness I taught mine. I hope they grow up knowing only love and strength, like what I see in this house." Then she was gone, leaving Clara and Wyatt standing in their parlor, processing what had just happened. "Well," Wyatt said finally, "didn't expect that." "People can surprise you," Clara murmured. She moved to him, taking his hands. "Are you all right?" "I'm not sure. Angry still. But also," he shrugged, "it's hard to hate someone who's already punishing themselves worse than we ever could." "Maybe that's what forgiveness is," Clara suggested. "Not forgetting, but letting go of the anger so it doesn't poison us too." Thunder crashed overhead, making them both look toward the window. The storm had arrived in earnest now, rain lashing against the glass. "Come on," Wyatt said, tugging her toward the kitchen. "Let's make some tea and watch the storm. Like old times." They settled at the kitchen table with steaming cups, watching the rain turn the yard into a muddy lake. It was peaceful, despite the violence of the weather. Or perhaps because of it, there was something cleansing about a good storm. "Remember the first time?" Clara asked. "You brought me here in a storm like this." "How could I forget muddy, defiant woman dripping all over my clean floor?" Clara laughed. "Your floor wasn't that clean." "It was cleaner before you arrived." He caught her hand across the table. "Thank God you arrived." "Thank God you were there to catch me," Clara countered. "My stubborn, taciturn rancher who offered shelter and changed everything." "Not so taciturn anymore. You've corrupted me with all your talking. Someone had to teach you to use your words." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the storm rage. So much had changed, but this quiet connection, this sense of rightness remained constant. A particularly loud crack of thunder shook the house, and Clara felt the baby kick in response. She gasped, pressing her free hand to her belly. "What is it?" Wyatt was instantly alert. "Are you all right?" "Feel," Clara said, guiding his hand to where the baby was moving. "There, do you feel it?" Wonder spread across Wyatt's face. Strong little thing. "Takes after both parents, I expect." Clara covered his hand with hers. "This child will grow up on this land, learning to ride before they can properly walk. They'll know every inch of this ranch, every horse, every season. They'll know they were wanted," Wyatt added softly. "Planned for, hoped for. They'll know their parents chose each other, chose this life, chose to build something lasting." Clara agreed. The storm was moving off now, thunder growing distant. But Clara didn't move, content to sit with her husband's hand on her belly, their child safe between them. "I should check the stock," Wyatt said eventually, though he made no move to go. "In a minute," Clara said. "Just stay a minute more." So they stayed, watching the sky clear and the sun break through. The ranch would need tending, it always did. There would be fences to check and animals to feed and all the endless work of keeping a place running. But for now, for just these few moments more, they had this each other, their coming child, and a love forged in storms and tested by fire. "No regrets?" Wyatt asked, an echo of all the times he'd asked before. "None," Clara answered, as she always did. "Not a single one." Outside, the storm moved on to trouble other souls, leaving the Double C Ranch washed clean and gleaming in the afternoon sun. The new barn stood proud against the clearing sky. The house was solid around them, and the future stretched ahead full of promise. Clara Cade, née Hensley, rancher and wife and soon-to-be mother, was home. The thunder that had shaken her world had led her here, to this table, this man, this life. And though storms would come again, they always did in this wild country, she would weather them all with her partner at her side. The walls might shake, the thunder might roar, but what they'd built together would stand, always. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what you thought of Clara and Wyatt's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of love, courage, and perseverance in the Old West.